Hello, I'm Mark Glasbrook, Managing Director of Migration Solutions. This month we've featured an interview with the Education Minister, the Honourable Christopher Pyne, who talks about the International Student Visa Program and the importance of it to the Australian economy, and also opportunities for international graduates to remain in Australia once they've completed their education. Sit back, enjoy, have a look, and we'd love to hear your comments.
Well, international education is about a $15 billion industry in Australia every year. It was about $19 billion when the Howard government lost office in 2007, and with Labor's changes it was reduced to about $15 billion. It is starting to recover, but recently became our third biggest export industry after iron ore and coal. It's just surpassed gold, in fact. So it's the only major export industry that isn't mining related. It's much bigger than tourism, for example. So international education is a very important industry for Australia, and it's a very important revenue stream for universities. Universities rely on it if they're going to be able to expand, cross-subsidise their teaching and student load with research, and I'm very committed to expanding the international education market so that that $15 billion grows, recovers to $19 billion plus, and keeps pace with the other industries that are obviously earning wealth for Australia. Well, Lachlan, most Australians see the enormous benefit of international students. If you're in Adelaide, for example, or Ballarat, or Rockhampton, not to mention Perth, Sydney, Melbourne, etc., international students have transformed often the central business districts of those kinds of cities and towns because they bring enormous wealth and expenditure to those markets. They have to live in the cities, they go to the shops, the restaurants, they play in the sporting teams. They make a big difference to the populations of CBDs. Here in Adelaide, the housing market in the CBD has been given a lot of boosting by international students. It's very important that we maintain our international students and expand those. Now, Labor's tried to blame other factors like the Australian dollar for declining international education, but one of the key things that damaged our international education market was using a sledgehammer to break a walnut over student visas. I have a different view. I think the more international students who come here, the better. And what we've done very quickly in the new government with Scott Morrison is expanded the SVPs, the streamlined visa processing, to more international higher education providers. We expanded it beyond the universities to about 22 more higher education providers, and recently in the last couple of months we've expanded that further to about another 50 or so higher education providers who are low risk in terms of students that might abscond or not do the right thing. These are low risk providers who are offering quality education. That streamlined visa processing will mean that we'll have more international students. They'll find it easier to come here and to stay here, and I think that's exactly the direction in which we want to head, and so does the Prime Minister, not to mention the premiers of most of the smart states who recognise that international students make a big difference to their local economies. Well, we have genuine competition from New Zealand, from Canada, the US and the UK, but we also have a lot of advantages. We're in a very similar time zone. We have a tremendous climate that attracts people to Australia. The families of international students like their children coming to Australia to study because they feel very safe here. They know that we are a safe Western country that will protect their family members, and they can come and visit. So we not only get the international students living in the cities and working and studying in the cities, but we get their families coming to visit them. And most tourism operators will tell you that the families of international students also add to their to their profit, add to their turnover, because they come and visit their young family members where they're living and then return home to particularly Asia. So we have great advantages. We have a high quality education system, and my higher education reforms will make that a more high quality education system. We have to maintain that, and we can't be complacent. What we saw in the period of the Labor government was that Canada, New Zealand, the US, the UK capitalised on us making it harder for international students to come here. So we've tried to make it easier. So one of the other things we've done is collapse the 5 different tests for international students into 3, so that they find it easier to come to this country. And we need to understand that if we take our eye off the ball, other markets will capitalise on that weakness and attract those students. And they also have high quality education systems. Well, there's 2 things I'd say to that. One, international education is great from a soft diplomacy point of view, because international students that come to Australia have a good educational experience and living experience in Australia, return home to their countries of origin and spruik the benefits of international education in Australia, but also talk about what a great country Australia is. And so international students benefit us in returning home. But they also don't take anything away from domestic students here in Australia. No domestic Australian student misses out on a place at university because of international students. In fact, without the international students, there'd be less places for domestic students in Australian institutions. The international students provide a revenue stream that universities wouldn't otherwise have, allowing them to expand their offerings to domestic students. So they're a very important part of the growing education market in this country. There's some misrepresentation of the role of international students, but not only do they return home and talk about how great Australia is to live and study in, but they also provide the revenue that allow universities to give more Australians the opportunity to get a higher education qualification. Well, the original Colombo plan brought a lot of Asian and Indian, Pakistani, etc., Sri Lankan young people to Australia in the 50s and 60s, and many of them returned home, became heads of public service, heads of businesses, heads of government, cabinet ministers, and they all speak very highly of the time that they spent in Australia. Recently I opened the Australia-Indonesia Institute at Monash University, and I opened it with the Vice President of Indonesia, who himself had studied at Monash University, and he was a great believer in international education and Australian education. We now have the new Colombo plan, which complements our international education market. The new Colombo plan sends Australians to Asian destinations to study, and this is all part of the exchange of ideas, the exchange of people, and builds up between our country and Asian countries a much better understanding of our different cultures, the way we think, the way we do business, the way we do education, which means that when we're talking to our counterparts down the track and they're talking to Australians, they have shared experiences and can share fun stories and good times that they had here, and Australians who had good times in Asia, and that makes an enormous difference to breaking down barriers between us and different cultures. Well, I'm instinctively a big Australia person. I believe that migration has made Australia the country it is today. The fact that we are a stable, multicultural democracy, that the vast majority of migrants that come to Australia come here because they see a better opportunity for themselves and their families to have a better life, and they overwhelmingly want to contribute to that stable and multicultural society. The vast majority of people that I deal with in my daily life as a Member of Parliament don't bring the arguments from their original country to Australia. In fact, that's why they're leaving those countries. So instinctively, I want more international students to apply for permanent residency in Australia. If they meet the requirements, the criteria, I want them to be able to stay here. I think that if we've educated international students in engineering or economics or law or dentistry or other areas where we need more workers, then having absorbed our culture, our language, our way of doing things, after 3, 4, 5 years of being here, why wouldn't we want those people to remain here and be permanent residents? Now, there obviously has to be a limit to the number of people we take every year in terms of skilled migration, but I am open to more international students staying here as permanent residents and having their own families here, engaging with our own local native-born Australians, if you like, and so that I'm not against that as a future part of our program. Well, in terms of English language proficiency, familiarisation with our culture, these are things that international students who've spent half a decade studying in Adelaide or wherever are going to know that much better than new migrants. So therefore, I would encourage as many international students as wish to apply for permanent residency, and if we can accommodate them, then I can't see why we wouldn't. And that's also part of what we're trying to do, Scott Morrison and I, with the Department of Immigration and the Department of Education, is to facilitate application rather than to put barriers in the place. So faster processing of visas, an openness to processing visas, rather than approaching it from the point of view of these people are trying to do something we don't want them to do. In fact, we want them to stay here if they can, if we can fit them in our program, and therefore I have an open door approach, an open Australia approach to more migration, as long as it's within the limits that we've already placed on the program and fits within the other criteria of the immigration program. Well, my higher education reforms are very important from the point of view of allowing our Australian universities to compete with their international counterparts. And it is a real competition. 5 years ago, there were no Chinese universities in the top 200 of the Shanghai Jiaotong Index, none. Today there are 5. There are 7 Australian universities in the top 200, and 5 years ago there were 6. So while we've gained 1, China has gained 5. Now, if the Chinese domestic students believe they can stay home, or the Indonesians or Malaysians or Vietnamese, and think they can get as good or better education at home, why wouldn't they save the money rather than coming to Australia? So it's very important that these reforms get passed so that our Australian universities can compete and be the best in the world, some of the best universities in the world and the best higher education system in the world, in order to keep those international students wanting to come to Australia and get the best experience possible, a living experience and an educational experience, the best qualifications that they can possibly get, either to return home or to use them here in Australia. Well, under Labor we saw a slowing down in the times that it took to process visa applications, and we also saw a reduction in the number of officers of the Department of Immigration processing those visas. Now, the less people processing, the slower the times are going to be to turn those decisions around. Now, we need to have the right resources applied to quick processing of visas, because you'll find that in New Zealand, in Canada, elsewhere, those visas can be turned around very fast. We don't want to lose out in the international education market because of a lack of attention to the bureaucracy that surrounds international education. I'm happy to say that the new Immigration Minister, Scott Morrison, and I are both very aware of that. We've already shown our bona fides to the sector by expanding the streamlined visa processing arrangements to more institutions. Now, we want to continue to do that while maintaining a robust and effective program. But the faster we can get the visas processed, and if hurdles aren't put in the place of those visa applications, unnecessary hurdles, then we'll continue to be an attractive destination for international education.